Hello, I'm Humble Fish, and I'm here with my good friend Paul B. A lot of you all might know Paul from the forums and everything. And right here is Paul B's. It may very well be the oldest private aquarium in the world. This aquarium is 50 years old.
51.
51.
And I may be the oldest fish keeper in the world.
How old are you?
73.
73.
That fish is 30, but you know, who's counting?
Yes. So, so we're gonna do something a little different. You know, on my channel, you know, we talk a lot about you know, quarantining and medications and everything. And my friend Paul, he does the exact opposite. He doesn't quarantine. He doesn't believe in medicating fish. He has a completely different approach to keeping fish and acclimating fish and all that. So I guess the first thing let's start off with is how did you get into the hobby? Tell us about that.
Wait a minute. Humble's always talking about these parasites that can fly 10 feet. I got one. I got into the hobby in the 50s because my dad died when I was 10, but he had a fish market, so he used to bring me to the Fulton Fish Market in Manhattan. And over there they used to take the ships with the fish in them used to come into the dock, and they used to take them with big cranes and dump them right on the sidewalk, sea turtles and all. And I used to climb on top of the sea turtles and play with them and everything. And when I was going through the piles of dead fish, I would always find like a little crab or seahorse or something. Matter of fact, I still have a seahorse over here someplace. And I would bring it home and put it in water and hopefully keep it alive. And I didn't know about salt water, so everything died. But that's how I got my start in fish. I've had fish since 1951, probably, something like that. And saltwater came out in 1971 in the United States. And I came home from Vietnam in 1971, and there was a fish store in Manhattan, right by the Trade Center. It was a gigantic fish place called Aquarium Stock Company. They had sea turtles, they had any kind of fish, or lizard that you could ask for. The place was gigantic. And they were the first ones that got saltwater fish. They got blue devils. It was $7, which was a lot of money, because gas was like 28 cents then, so figure out like that. And I got 7 blue devils. And I put them in the tank and they died. And then I got a few more, and I put them in the tank and they probably died. And then I got some more, and I thought fish was supposed to have white spots on them, because in those days all fish had ick. Everything had ick. And we didn't know what to do with ick. There was no copper, liquid medication and all of that. So I read a book by Robert Strawn, the father of saltwater fish. And he said, put 20 pennies to the gallon in there for the copper. In those days, pennies were made out of copper. Now they're made out of Toyota Land Cruisers. I don't know what the hell they're made out of. And you put 20 pennies to the gallon, and it would dissolve enough copper in the water to keep the ick away. But if you left the pennies in there too long, of course they would get overdosed and they'd be laying on the bottom, gasping. And if you didn't leave the pennies in there long enough, they would die from ick. So, it was, you know, like today, people think it's hard to keep saltwater fish. You got all these stupid test kits and everything. We didn't have test kits. We had to take 5 cents out of the water or put in a couple of nickels or something. And that's how you cured ick. Then, my wife will get that. Then I figured out, that if I feed them worms, which I had black worms. Somebody's going to answer Jody's cell in a minute, I guess. That's my daughter.
Okay.
Call from Jody's cell.
That's okay.
If I feed them black worms, which I had because I was raising discus and stuff, after 7 weeks, those blue devils, which I don't have any thankfully, the fins on one of them turned blue. Blue devils have like clear fins. So I noticed the fins on one of them turned a bright blue, and they started to spawn just from the black worms. And it took about a few weeks. And then after that, I figured out I didn't need the pennies anymore. So about 1973 or so, I figured out how to get rid of ick, and I didn't need pennies anymore. Years later, I figured out that it was because of the gut bacteria. And I just found out a few years ago, it's the gut bacteria controls almost 100% the fish health, the fish immunity. I said me and Humble have different ways of doing things. He has, I have this stuff here, this stuff that kills parasites that fly 10 feet. You have to keep that handy for when he comes by.
So well, let's talk about the gut bacteria. So that's to you. That's the key to the fish's health, boosting their immune system, so they're resistant to or immune to the parasites and worms. So someone's like listening to this and they're like, okay, well, how do I feed the gut bacteria? How would they do that?
The gut bacteria, by the way, is what controls most of our immunity too. That's why when you have a cancer patient and they give them radiation, kills all the bacteria, the gut bacteria in them and everything, they look like crap. And they have to keep them on medication to keep them alive, those people, because if somebody sneezes near them, they're going to die. It's gut bacteria. But anyway, with the fish, there's a few things you could do. Most of you can't collect amphipods like I can. I collected a bunch this morning. But you can buy live white worms. I have a white worm culture in the next room over there. It costs about $15, and I have it about 12 or 15 years. And they keep reproducing. All you have to do is feed them bread. Put some yogurt on it if you feel like it. And they reproduce like crazy. They live in the salt water for 5 days. And they're loaded with gut bacteria because they're filthy suckers. They stink like hell if you don't clean the dirt. And they got plenty of gut bacteria in them. So maybe 2 times a week I give them a few white worms. And I never have to quarantine. This fish is 30 years old. It spawns every couple of weeks.
Talking about this clownfish right here. This
That fire clown is about 30 years old. There's a couple of ruby red dragonettes in here. He can tell you it's totally so pregnant it's going to blow up any minute. They spawn all the time. The mandarins spawn all the time. I don't feed them stuff. Every fish in here that can spawn does spawn, because if your fish don't spawn, they're not healthy. If they're paired. I mean, the angel is not going to spawn. But spawning fish are healthy fish because only the healthiest of fish can spawn. And every fish in the ocean is pregnant, if it's a male. And if it's not healthy. It's either too old and it's going to die. So that's why, and I feel totally different than my buddy Humble over here. I feel that quarantine and medication shortens the life of fish drastically, which is probably the reason there are no old quarantine tanks.
So we talked about, because you said, well, okay, so black worms and white worms were 2 good foods, live foods that you all can feed to boost the gut bacteria. So I know we've talked about like not feeding flake food, not feeding
no
pellets.
No pellets.
What are some other foods? I know we talked about clams. What are some other foods that
clams? You can't feed flakes or pellets. I mean, they sound good and they have all the vitamins and minerals on the box that fish need, and there's a pretty picture of an angelfish on the cover and everything, and they'll have everything the fish needs, except they have no oils and they have no gut bacteria because they're processed. Any food, even for us, that doesn't need refrigeration, except for peanut butter for some reason, is not healthy. Foods that don't need refrigeration are not healthy. That's why you could keep flake foods and pellet foods for years without refrigeration, because there's nothing in them to go bad. If there's nothing in them to go bad, there's nothing in it to keep the fish alive. They'll stay alive, but they won't stay healthy. Black worms are very good, but they have a problem. Black worms only live about 8 seconds in salt water. White worms live 5 days, which I tried many times. So what I do is, we were just talking, me and my buddy Humble, we were just talking. I get the worms, the white worms, and I use one of these things, and I shoot it behind the rocks. I do that for the mandarins and the ruby reds and the stuff that stays behind the rocks, because they live for 5 days, and the mandarins, climb around and they find them eventually. If I shoot them all in the front, the fish eat them right away. I mean, I put some in the front, but to feed the mandarins and things, I shoot them in the back, and they find every one of them.
So if let's just say someone didn't have access to black worms, or they didn't want to grow a white worm culture, could they feed clams?
Then you could feed clams.
Mussels,
I know if you live in Tunisia,
scallops.
you can't get them.
Okay. Like what are
Not
some
scallops.
other foods? Not scallops. Okay.
No.
So
Not
what are
scallops,
some other foods?
not squid, not
Okay.
octopus, not fish fillets, because those fish and creatures I just mentioned, when you're feeding those, you're feeding just the muscles. Like if you feed an octopus, you're not feeding the whole octopus, you're feeding the tentacles. They don't give you the guts. If you're feeding a scallop, that's the muscle. That's the muscle that holds the shells together. They call them valves. But if you feed a clam or a mussel or an oyster, you're feeding, or a snail, you're feeding the whole creature with the gut bacteria. Of course, it can't be cooked. and it can't be frozen for like 10 years. So I buy my clams live, because I make a lot of clam chowder. I'm Italian, what can I tell you? So I buy the clams live, and I get big clams, and I freeze them myself. So by freezing them myself, the freezer doesn't kill all the gut bacteria. But if you buy frozen clams in a fish store, an LFS, they're not made for human food, so that could have been frozen 20 years. There's no law on that. You don't know when they froze it. So you're better off if you can get fresh clams, if you can get live clams, and freeze it yourself. I know a lot of people can't, but if you can't, the best thing to do would be get a live white worm culture. It's $15, it'll last you the rest of your life. And they have all the gut bacteria you need. You shouldn't feed fish fillets either. A lot of people feed salmon and smelts and sardines and all of that, because you're just feeding the muscle. That's what we eat. We eat the muscle. When we eat a fillet fish, that's the muscle of the fish. The bacteria is in the gut, and the oils are in the gut, which you don't get in dry food because it stinks.
Right.
They don't put oil in dry food.
So what about things like, so what I'm trying to do here is, like, it's easy if you live on the coast or near the coast to get, clams and
Mussels and
oysters. But I'm trying to, people that may live in the center of the country that don't have access.
Then they have to get white worms.
So white worms.
So
how do you feel about mysis shrimp and what we talked about maybe?
I feed them mysis shrimp every day because I have some pipe fish in here that's all they eat.
Okay.
It's not my favorite food because, again, there's two problems with mysis shrimp. First of all, they're mostly shell. A little animal like that, 1/4 inch long, probably 3/4 of that creature is shell, and that shell is not good for the fish. It's not made out of calcium. If it was made out of calcium, it would be okay, but it's not. It's made out of keratin, I think, the stuff the nails are made out of. So it doesn't do anything for the fish. Fish really need calcium, which is not in mysis. As far as
How about baby brine shrimp?
Newborn brine shrimp are very healthy for a day or so, but my fish won't see them. You can only feed them to little mandarins and things like that. They got to be brand new, newborn, like a day old. After a couple of days, they don't have much nutrition. And I don't. And if you raise the brine shrimp yourself, I don't know what kind of gut bacteria they're going to have either, because you're raising them in a sterile container.
Right.
They're not having any gut bacteria really.
So the big key would be white worms.
The white worms are in soil, and and you feed them, bread and stuff, and there's a lot of bacteria in the soil, and that bacteria is in the gut of the fish, of the worm, which goes into the fish, because if you have a tank, and suppose you quarantine the tank or you medicate it or something like that, that tank is sterile when it comes to the correct gut bacteria. They got some kind of gut bacteria, but it's not the right gut bacteria that's going to do anything for their immunity, which is why on a lot of sites, especially this one, and I'm sure Bobby knows, if you treat a fish for, say, ick or something like that, and you give it copper or Prizor or something like that, a week later the fish comes down with something else. Urinoma or something, which I never heard of. The fish comes with something else.
Yeah, most medications are immunosuppressants.
Yeah.
They'll suppress their immune
Almost
system.
all medications, especially copper. So if you cure the ick, the fish is going to get something else. Because there's bacteria, there's parasites, there's viruses, and there's funguses. Those are the four kind of main disease organisms. But in nature, they all keep each other in check, because parasites are preyed on by bacteria and viruses, and bacteria are preyed on by viruses, and they all keep each other in check. So if you kill, say, the parasites, the bacteria could take over, or the viruses could take over, or if you kill the viruses, something else could take over. That's why when you cure a fish with fish medications, a lot of times they get something else, and you might not be able to cure that something else. It's to me, my theory, but of course you don't have to go by it. My theory is to feed the fish, you could call it dirty food if you want, worms or clams or something that's not from a fish store, something that's not from an LFS, something that hasn't been frozen since Nancy Pelosi was born. You buy something, and those things have gut bacteria in it. A lot of times I buy bait. You could even buy earthworms if you live in someplace
right
in the middle of the country.
Or, Paul lives right here, Long Island, right by the ocean. He just collected some amphipods.
I collected them this morning.
He collected them, and he feeds those. So again, live food, that you're getting from the ocean.
But you can get earthworms anywhere. And I used to feed earthworms. You know what loves earthworms? Anemones. I got a bunch of anemones in here, which
Bubble tips
I don't want, but they're in here. They love earthworms. These fish love earthworms too. And if you want, you could get the earthworms and freeze them and break them up in little pieces and give it to them. They'll give you the gut bacteria. And you can get them anywhere, I think. But I like the white worms because they'll live. You can feed whole earthworms too, but if your fish are big enough to eat them, they might not be big enough to eat them.
So the gist of this is basically, if you want your fish to be healthy, I would say feed flake or pellets very sparingly. Sometimes, you're not home or if you're on vacation or something. But I think what my friend Paul's trying to say is you need to, feed the gut bacteria, and you have to use live foods, live white worms, maybe clams, things that are meaty, things that the fish would normally eat in the ocean.
Yes, remember, in the ocean, fish eat almost 100% live fish. Every one of these fish, when he was in the ocean, was eating live fish. They eat baby fish. That's almost every fish in the ocean eats that. None of them eat pellets and flakes and all that stuff. And every bite of live fish they eat has parasites, viruses, and bacteria in it. That's an oil. If you give it pellets, he's not getting any of that stuff. And when one of these fish eat a baby fish in the ocean, that baby fish could be 20% oil, cod liver oil, if you're getting it from a cod. And fish need oil. If a shark eats another fish, that fish could be 20% oil. So if a shark eats a 100-pound fish, he's getting 20 pounds of oil, maybe 15. That's a lot of oil. That would kill us. But we're not giving them that when we're giving them dry food.
So do you still, I know we used to talk about soaking fish oil, like omega-3, omega-6 fish oil in the food. Do you still do that?
I don't, because I have access to clams. But if I didn't have access to clams and things like that, I would take some pellets, which I don't want to feed, or the best thing, freeze-dried tubifex worms, and I would put a little fish oil on there. Or if I was feeding, say, a lionfish, a predator like a lionfish or a moray eel or something like that, I would inject the cod liver oil in like a goldfish or shrimp or something like that and throw it in there. And your fish would be getting the benefits of the saltwater oil. And it seems to work because goldfish is not good food. But if you inject them with cod liver oil, it's better. I don't know how much better because I'm not a fish. But it's better. Anyway, so to prove my theory, because I know a lot of people are telling me that I'm nuts. To prove my theory in this 51-year-old tank and them 30-year-old fish, none of these fish have been medicated or quarantined forever. This tank is up since 1971. It's in the third clip. This guy is about 3. There's a sunburst anthias in here. There's a couple of them in here. Actually, there's a cardinal fish trying to mate with it. Ain't gonna happen. But the cardinal fish constantly try to mate with the anthias. He doesn't. That's how healthy he is. He thinks he can mate with an anthias, but he can't. None of these things have ever been. There's a hippo tang in here. He's not coming out because we're sitting in front of the tank. There's 30 fish in here.
Right here.
Yeah, he doesn't. They don't come out because we're sitting in front of the tank and they got the lights on and everything. But fish have lived in here 18 years. He's 30. Nothing has ever been quarantined. And matter of fact, when last week Humble was here and I put that big what do you call that coral? That leather thing.
It's Anthalia.
Anthalia. I'm not good with names. I put that thing in here and I just took it out of the bag and put it in there, right?
Yeah, you just basically put it right in. Didn't really even acclimate it.
No.
So these are.
And this bucket of Amphipods, I'm just going to throw it in there. I just picked it up out of the ocean a while hours ago.
So Paul, he's unorthodox. He does things very differently than what you'll read and what is recommended. So that's why we're doing this. We're doing this interview so he can give you his point of view about how he does things that just kind of go against the grain and are unorthodox.
Yeah.
What about the tank itself?
Well,
because
don't forget, I'm not unorthodox. Well, you people are.
You're the one.
I started with this hobby when it was invented, so my methods were the only methods. Then they invented computers and changed everything. But this was the methods that the hobby evolved with. Now it's changed.
So this tank is okay. So let's shift now to like the tank itself because this tank has been set up since 1971, before I was born, and so but there's no sump.
No sump.
No sump.
They didn't have sumps then, so I
So
don't have a sump.
can you describe like how the tank is set up? How do you
It
have
went off.
like? I think. Yeah, it was still recording. I'll have to edit that part out. Anyway, okay. Sorry about that little
The tank
technical
has
glitch.
the tank has a reverse. Flip that switch on the side there. Oh,
Which one? Oh.
the
Okay.
tank has a reverse underground filter. The tank used to have a regular underground filter because we all used to be in freshwater, and at one time underground filters were the only way to go. So this used to have a regular underground filter, and it was a horror. Every few months it would almost crash. It would stink like hell, and it was just disgusting. So then I figured out that if you reverse the flow, can't really see it, but behind that this silly algae scrubber thing here, there's a little container, and the water gets pumped into the container from a power head that's in here, and it goes down under the gravel. There's 3 plates under here, and for a reverse underground filter, you have to run it very slow. There's 150 gallons an hour going through each plate, which is very slow. If you run it too fast, it pushes all the detritus in the gravel and it clogs. Then it don't work anymore. So you want it very, very slow. Just enough to put a little bit of oxygen in there. And once or twice a year, I have an old Diatom filter that's older than him. And I stir up the gravel and I blow everything around and I blow the detritus out of the rocks and everything, and it makes a big mess. The fish love it. I do that once or twice a year. People say it's for the parasites. Not for any parasites. It's to break up any clumps in the gravel so there's flow going through there. You got to have oxygen in the bottom for it to work. I don't like deep sand beds. I think it's a stupid idea, but that's just me. The rock, most of the rock in here I made. Like you can see this big piece, and because I scuba dove for the rock originally, and years ago you could bring it home on your lap. Today they shoot you, but you used to be able to just put it on your lap and carry it wet and stinky and everything. They didn't care what you did, and that's how I brought all my rock home. But then they invented the air marshals and things like that, and now they would just shoot you. So I make it now out of PVC pipe covered in cement, and I can make much nicer pieces than I could buy. Because the stuff you buy, somebody in the tropics picks it up out of the ocean and throw it up on a barge, and all the little protrusions break off of it. So you can't buy nice looking rock. It's easy to make, and it's practically free. So a lot of it, and it's hollow. The stuff I make is hollow, which is kind of cool.
And that's in his book, by the way, which we're going to talk about.
My book.
So that's the book, the Avant-Garde Aquarius, right?
Avant-Garde Marine Aquarius.
Marine Aquarius. You can buy it on Amazon.
Yep.
And
100% of the profits goes to MS research because my wife has MS.
So everything that Paul's talking about here, if you're looking for the details, like he talks about building his own rock, you're like, well, how do I build my own rock? The details are in the book. So buy the book.
Details are in the book, or you can ask me on his site. I have a lot of answers on his site. The gravel in here is dolomite. I don't think you can get it anymore. You got to go to like a mausoleum in Italy or something.
I'm good.
It's they make, I think, tombstones out of it in Italy. I don't know what the hell they do with it.
Because most people nowadays use sand, but you're using dolomite, which I know back in the early days was either dolomite or crushed coral.
You can't use sand with a reverse underground filter.
Right, you'll just go underneath the filter plate.
Yeah, and it'll clog. You got to use this dolomite. It's about as big as rice grains. Like you could use crushed coral, I guess. But this is dolomite. I have a problem in this tank because all of this stuff that looks like what do you call that coral? Montipora. It's sponge. And the reason there's no more SPS in here is because that sponge, it's a photosynthetic sponge, horrible stuff. I put a piece in there about 10 years ago, it covered everything. And I tried to cut it out once. And when you cut it out, it oozes like this white stuff comes out of it and instantly kills the SPS corals. But for some reason, the leather corals like it. So I got almost all leathers and gorgonians in here, which I kind of like better anyway. I'm gradually getting rid of this blue sponge. I put some polyfilters and this stuff. I got a container with Phosguard. This takes out silica. And what happens is, I collect my water in the back here. There's an ocean behind me here.
So that's the other important thing. He basically collects, uses natural seawater.
Yeah.
He'll collect natural seawater right out of the ocean. I think you run it through a poly filter.
Now I do to get the silicate out.
Okay.
For 45 years I didn't. I used artificial water, but since I live next to the ocean, I use ocean water.
So that may be another thing. If you live near the ocean, try to collect your own natural seawater and use that.
And throw some mud in there while you're doing it.
Throw some mud in there. Right. Yeah.
If you live near an ocean, throw some mud in there. You could throw soil, topsoil too. If you're setting up a tank, that's the way it used to be done to put the bacteria in. I know now you buy it in a bottle and everything,
Right.
but in my Bible, Robert Strong's book, it was,
Because bacteria is bacteria. Land bacteria will live in water. So that's a good way to seed your tank. So you look at an unconventional way to seed your tank. Yeah, nowadays people will buy bacteria in a bottle. Some mud does the same thing.
unconventional but original.
Original.
Now it's unconventional.
So we talked about the rock and the reverse flow undergravel filter and the dolomite. Now
This is an algae scrubber.
So you got an algae scrubber, which I'm a big fan of those because what does an algae scrubber do? Let's talk about that.
Okay, this is an algae scrubber. I made that probably for $1. It's
He does a lot of his own DIY stuff.
Yeah,
Real
I
handy.
don't buy anything. That's one of those things that you do needlepoint in, right? One of that thing there.
Yep.
That's one of the things you do needlepoint in, and a lot of people have problems with algae scrubbers because they take a month or so before they grow algae. But what you got to do is you rough it up with some heavy sandpaper, and you smear Saccharine mortar mix on there. You get a thin coat of cement on there, and then put it up there. Algae loves cement for some reason. It sticks to it good, and it probably uses the calcium in it. I don't know. And then it'll grow like crazy. Otherwise, if you just take a new piece of that and try to grow algae on it, it's going to take a month or two. So I always put a little cement on it when I first make it.
And the point of the algae scrubber is that the algae grows on the scrubber, the screen, and not in your tank.
Right.
So basically, what you're doing is, a lot of people fight nuisance algae in their aquarium. You're basically redirecting the growth to grow on that screen, which you can just take it and just clean it off, and then
Right, there's no algae in here.
Right.
You see any algae in there?
Clean.
No
Yeah,
algae.
no algae.
Just that red seaweed. I don't know what that is.
So the lights are LEDs. Looks like.
The lights are probably cheap Chinese LEDs.
Yeah. Okay. But it works.
They work.
Yeah. Now behind the tank, there's Paul made his own. We can't see it, but he made his own giant.
You might be able to see it a little bit, but there's a skimmer back
Yeah,
there.
big protein skimmer. So that's important. And there's also ozone running back here, right?
Now there's ozone running. Yeah,
Right,
there's ozone. I put ozone in the skimmer.
See if I'm forgetting anything else. Yeah, you got a skimmer. You got some ozone. What is the reactor? You got a reactor.
That's
back
a
here.
denitrate thing.
Okay.
That's only been in there for about 2 years. A denitrification thing. It's got sulfur pellets in it. That's only in there because I felt like making something one day and I had those pellets. So I don't know if it actually does anything, but I think it's cool. So it's back there. I don't think there's anything else. There's no sump. There's no
sump?
There's no controllers. There's no doses.
You got.
I'm the doser.
You got your wave makers. You got good circulation. I noticed that you have, which I'm a proponent of. You've got your wave makers pointing towards the surface.
Yeah, you see how the surface is
good gas exchange.
agitated. This side. I have a big. What do you call those big pumps?
The gyres.
Gyres.
Yeah,
There's
the
a big
gyres.
gyre in there.
Yeah. And
I
it's
think
like
they have
pointed
it on,
towards a lot of surface agitation, disturbance.
It's almost on full speed, and the power heads. I always face them up towards the top.
No controller. No.
There's no doser, no control. The
no
only controller on
dosing
here is a $7 thing that turns the lights on. There's no doses. I throw a little calcium and alkaline every once in a while, and I test it once in a blue moon.
Show me your hydrometer.
My hydrometer.
This is how you test salinity.
My hydrometer.
Most
is
of us
very
use a
cool.
refractometer. So those are what we used in the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
See, I got lines drawn on there because whenever I go, I'm going next week to the Caribbean. I jump in the water with this, and wherever it floats, I draw a line on here, and that's what I use. I do have a refractometer. I like this better.
Hey, I've been in the hobby since 1977. I was
Probably
young.
when I got this.
I was a little bitty kid when I first started out. So yeah, I remember all that. So reverse flow underground filter, the rock. We talked about protein skimmer is very important. The algae scrubber.
Throw a few amphipods in
Yeah,
there, see what they
we're
do.
gonna dose some amphipods. Like I say, he collects these. His backyard, he lives right by the ocean, so, you know, the fish will eat him up, or some of them will get... I know you got a pair of mandarins in here, a pair of ruby red dragonets, a pair of clowns. You like fishing pairs?
Yeah, I got a pair of these sunburst
Antheus.
things. There might be a pair of 6 lines, I don't remember.
Okay.
The pipes, I had blue stripe pipes for many years, but they only live about 6 or 7 years, so they died. I had a copper band in here for 10 years, but he got that neurological disease that I put on your site.
Yeah.
He couldn't see anything anymore. But 10 years is all I could get out of those copper bands. I know they live longer, but after 10 years they seem to get some weird neurological thing. I don't know what the hell it is. But if you get 10 years, I can get 10 years out of these blue hippos, and then they have a problem.
Okay. So how would you? Okay, so you know, a lot of people watching this, maybe you're a new hobbyist, or you know, you want to set up a tank. How would you? And I know, you know, I mean, obviously, if you live by the ocean, you have a lot more options. But
Yes.
if you don't, you know, again, I'm trying to.
If I didn't live by the ocean,
How would you set up a tank from scratch?
if I set up a tank from scratch, I would get all live rock, as much live rock as I could afford. I know people spend $400 or $500 on controllers. Forget the controller. Get all the live rock you could afford.
Not dry rock.
No, don't use. You could use a little dry rock underneath there.
Right. But you
But
want
the
predominantly
more live rock you got,
Okay.
the better it is. Now, I personally would not quarantine that live rock. I would just put it in the tank. Of course, if you want to set up a quarantine tank, then you would have to quarantine the rock too, I guess, right?
Well, what you could really do, I mean, okay, so if you're worried about diseases, if you just put the live rock in a tank and you let it go 6 weeks at like 81 degrees Fahrenheit,
Oh, then you'll kill the parasites.
you'll kill any parasites.
It'll
in
kill the
it.
parasites, but even quarantine is not going to kill the bacteria. I don't care if you quarantine it for 10 years, it's not going to kill the bacteria. So if what is urinaroma, or is that a
That's a
bacteria?
parasite.
Urinoma?
Urinema.
That's a parasite?
That's a parasite.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, harmful bacteria. Okay, this is one of those things. I don't believe that by quarantining you can keep all pathogens out of the water. I just
Just parasites.
Parasites and worms. Viruses, there's no
Yeah.
cure for viruses. And bacteria,
No.
there's always going to be harmful bacteria. So
Worms, I hear worms a lot on your website. I have never dewormed a fish in my life.
right, you never use Prosi Pro. Yeah, flukes.
I never heard of it except on your
Yeah.
site. Wait, I got a fish medication over here.
I can show you.
This is my copper. It's still half full. It's made in Brooklyn. It's from probably the early 70s. Copper and formalin.
So okay.
Still half full.
Which back in
Never
the day,
used it.
that copper formalin treats pretty much everything.
And to dose iron, I have
This is good.
I have a container here with rusty nails in it.
Rusty nails.
Rusty nails. I take the water and it's dosed.
But you know what?
Now he's sitting over here. Do you see any spots on these fish? Any bacteria?
Well,
any broken fins? Anything
I
wrong with
have
any
not.
one of these fish?
I've been here for 2
Any
weeks
alkali
now,
or anything?
and I've not seen any diseases. Now, you will say that, look, sometimes you'll buy fish with ick or something. You'll put them in the tank. Sometimes they live, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, unless it's like really bad where
Right.
you know it's not going to live. And I get fish free sometimes like that. You go to a pet store and the thing is covered in ick. I'll throw it in there. If it lives, it lives. If it does, you know, if it gets cured, it gets cured. It'll stay in there.
Right. But the point is, what he's trying to say is, even if that fish, the fish that is sick, dies, his fish he feels are immune, or we you know, it's,
I say immune. Some people say
some people
resistant.
say resistance.
I would say resistant if one fish got sick in here, but they
Right.
never, not once did. So I call that immune.
Right. Some people, I call it resistant.
Yeah, you could call it whatever.
Right.
That
But
coral,
the fish are resistant. They're not going to get sick just because you put a sick fish in there.
that coral I bought with Bobby last week
Yeah.
from a filthy store.
We're not going to say the name of the
We're
store.
not going to say the name, but there was a lot of sick fish in that store, and I just took it out of the bag and threw it right in here. And that hippo tang is one of the best looking hippo tangs I've ever seen. That cut in his tail was there when I got him. I don't know if they come with like that, but that one.
Yeah, like somebody nipped.
I don't know who's always
on his
been like
tail.
that.
Probably the clownfish. Are you saying he was like that when you got
It
him?
was like that when I got him.
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, that cut in his tail was always like that. He never, I don't know. But there's not a spot on anything in here. Not a fin out of place. Not a broken fin. Nothing. They never scratch, they don't do anything, and I throw anything I want from any store in here. I don't care how many parasites it has. The parasites, my thing is you need parasites in the tank to keep the fish immune. Just like I have 3 COVID vaccines to try to keep me immune.
Yeah, but those are medications.
Yeah, well, no, they're not. They're weak viruses.
Right.
You could call it a medication,
Right.
but it's a weak virus. The medication is an
Oh, yeah,
aspirin.
you're right. Yeah, yeah.
It's a weak virus, right? And if I'm putting parasites in here, now I know these fish are immune. So if I have parasites in here, they're not going to affect my fish because the fish are immune.
So you're saying the reason that you want parasites in your tank is you want the fish's immune system to be constantly familiar with these parasites
Yes.
at a sublethal concentration so that they don't get sick.
Yes, and the fish,
They don't die.
They're immune to the parasites, but the parasite could still grab onto a fish a little bit and try and make its
Right.
way in there. Eventually, the fish's immune system will eliminate the parasite.
Right.
But once in a blue moon, I might see a spot on something.
So you
especially if it's
feel
a new fish.
so basically you feel like your fishes, their immune systems are stronger than the parasites.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
and that's the way they are in the ocean.
Right. Yeah, I
There's
agree with
parasites
that.
all over the ocean.
Yeah.
I've been scuba diving 50 years. I've never seen a parasite on a fish. That's just me. But if I throw, like I have thrown, it's in my book, a copper band in here covered in parasites.
Mhm.
I got the fish for $5, and I put a shrimp fish in here, 3, and one of them was covered in parasites. As a matter of fact, he died. And I put a little yellow clown goby in here. There was so many parasites on that fish, you couldn't see the fish.
Right.
They fell off. Nothing ever happened to anything. But I'm hoping some of them parasites lived in here. I can't see them, so I don't know. I'm hoping some of the parasites are alive in there, keeping the fish immune. And I assume they are, because if I put a fish in there with parasites, nothing happens. Nothing's going to happen. And now people say, well, you got to have a tang in there, and you got to put velvet in there. The friggin' hippo tangs I keep in here for 10 years. I'm sure in 10 years I put velvet in here and all these other diseases on your site, but I don't see anything.
So I mean, this is something. Look, I obviously I advocate quarantine and everything, but if you're looking for, we won't say unconventional. We'll say something different to try. And this is definitely, look, if you can make this work, this is a lot less headaches than having a quarantine and all this other stuff. I mean, if you can just set up a tank, all live rock, good flow, and everything else that
Natural
needs to go in here. Natural foods we talked about, and if you can just basically make this work and not have to quarantine, well, you're going to enjoy your aquarium. It's a lot easier than what I'm telling you to
I
do.
do nothing to this tank. I mean, once in a while I throw a little calcium, rusty nails, but I rarely test. I don't quarantine or I don't medicate. I haven't medicated in 40 years. And everything dies either of jumping out, which I got that under control now, I think.
Jumping out thing, yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot of things around here. It's hard to keep it from jumping out because there's no top on this tank because there's no sump, so a lot of things are in the water. But I got things up on the sides, so I don't jump out. I haven't lost a fish in a while. But that's normally how I would lose fish. Even the mandarins, the stupid mandarins, a couple of years ago, I wrote on your site, they jumped out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And you wouldn't think those fish could jump, but
Yeah, they're pretty.
They do.
So look, for every person that on my forum or asks me a question that says, hey, my fish are dying in quarantine, I probably have 9 people that coming to me, they don't quarantine, and they put the fish in the tank, and the fish has ick, and everything's dying. They're like, what do I do? And that's why I tell them,
yes, if
take
you
the
put
fish
fish
out.
in a new tank with egg, it's going to die.
What are they doing wrong? So what are they doing wrong?
What they're doing wrong is they don't have live rock in there, and they're not feeding the right foods.
Okay.
If you set up the tank, I don't like artificial seawater, but we have to use it. I know I used it for many years. But
What brand do you like? Artificial seawater?
Instant Ocean.
Instant Ocean, okay.
I had to use it for years. I don't like it. It's not real salt water. I know it has all the chemicals, but it's not. But, we have to use it, and it's fine. Live rock is the best thing you can do for the tank, and you have to feed the foods that I said. If you quarantine those fish or medicate them, my system won't work. If these fish were quarantined or medicated, they would have no immunity, and if I put one of his fish in here, it would probably die if it was quarantined or medicated, because to me that would destroy their immune system. You could obviously run a tank like that, like you do, But you
Yeah,
have to, you
I
have
had
to
fish
depend
that are-
on medications. All your tanks that are quarantined or medicated, you have to, if you put a fish in there, you have to make sure you quarantine it or medicate it so it don't have anything. I don't have that problem. I could put Godzilla in there. It really doesn't matter.
Because I've quarantined I've been quarantined. Well, there was a time I did things your way. There actually was a time that I didn't quarantine. I was pretty much doing things your way, and then I just got to the point where it just wasn't working for me anymore, which is why I got into quarantine. But I've had quarantine fish, once they go through quarantine, they're in my DT, live for 15, 20 years. But I'm more of an angel tang kind of guy.
Yeah.
More so.
I have an angel and a tang in here, and they live about 10 years, but I don't like, the only tang I like is a blue hippo. And I never had one 15 years. I think 10 or 12 was the most I ever had one, because they were always in smaller tanks.
Mm-hmm.
This tank is not the original glass. It started in a 40-gallon tank. They didn't have
Right.
25-gallon tanks in 1971.
Right, so that's the other thing we need to clarify. I mean, it's not the original tank glass aquarium itself. It's the contents of the tank have been moved 3 times over a 15
Yeah, I
years.
started the tank in a 40-gallon tank because that was considered big in 1971. But then I got all scratched and everything, and I got a 100-gallon tank. And I built that in the wall of my other house. And it was in the wall for 40 years. And, of course, it got all scratched. And I couldn't get it out of the wall without demolishing the house because I built it behind the wall. So when I moved here 4 years ago, I bought this tank on my way here. This is 125. And I took everything from the 100 and I put it in vats in the back of a truck. I came here and threw it in here. Matter of fact, I was down the block collecting water and a state trooper chased me out. So for about a month, the tank was half full because he wouldn't let me collect water.
There's the other thing, collect your own water. Natural seawater.
If you can collect natural seawater, not from Lake Erie, from the ocean, that's the best thing you could do. And you don't have to, well, I collect it, I do filter it because it's filthy. It's just like mud, like you've seen.
Wait, but you filter with a polyfilter or maybe a diatom?
No, I filter it with a diatom, not all of it, because I keep the mud on the bottom. I want to put the mud in here, but I used to filter it through a coffee filter. Now I have a bunch of diatom. But if you like this, most of this is natural seawater, and there's all the seaweed and slime in there. I mean, I took most of the mud out.
Right.
Otherwise, I couldn't see them. But the natural seawater that I collect from shore is loaded with mud. If I take it from my boat, I don't do anything to it. I just throw it in there. But it's not the natural seawater. It's the mud I use from the natural seawater, and it's the bacteria from the. We have to get out of that notion that everything is diseased and dirty. The disease is. We call things diseases and parasites. We call them parasites because we think they hurt our fish. The parasites are a normal part of the ocean. If they were cute like panda bears, we wouldn't call them parasites. We would call them pets. But since they're ugly and they suck blood,
We call them parasites.
we call them parasites. They probably call us parasites. But they've been in the ocean as long as the fish have been in the ocean, and they won't hurt your fish if your fish are immune. And you could get them immune by feeding them the right stuff, and by not quarantining them. If you start a new tank with dry rock and artificial seawater, yes, you have to. Even if you quarantine. If I did that, my fish would die because I don't know how to do that. Artificial seawater,
you're saying
PVC pipes and all of that. My
So
fish
you're
would die.
saying if someone starts the tank with artificial seawater and dry rock, they need a quarantine?
Yes. If you start a tank like that, it's not going to be healthy and it's probably going to crash.
Which is how most people do it nowadays because it's just more, I guess it's more affordable than buying
I
all
wouldn't
live
be in
rock.
this hobby. If I had to start a tank with artificial seawater and dry rock, I would not be in the hobby because I couldn't keep those fish alive.
Well, there are places online, I mean, they're few and far between nowadays, but there are some places that do still sell live rock. I mean,
I think there's a lot of places sell live rock, don't they? I don't know.
There's
I never
one-
bought it in my life.
There's some place in Tampa Bay that they put the rock down there. They take dry rock, but they leave it there for X number of years, and they sell it as
Yeah,
live
I mean,
rock.
the fish store of the block sells
Well-
live rock. It's expensive.
It's expensive. I don't know what it is nowadays.
It's like $12 a pound.
$12 a
pound is
pound.
like,
Right. But no, so maybe there's a compromise here. So if you're kind of like, I can't spend $12 a pound on rock. Maybe what you could do is you could do half live and half dry.
Well, you can get 10 pounds of rock for $100.
Right.
Which is not the end of the world. And with that, you'll be able to
Right.
seed the tank.
Right.
I mean, don't.
So do you recommend that people go slow when they first set up their tank, stocking it? Go slowly or
You
just
mean
go?
with the livestock?
Yeah, with
yes,
stock and
well,
livestock.
yes, with the livestock. But I would recommend as much live rock as you can get, and the rest of the tank should be full. See how much I got the rock all the way up to the top here? Because that live rock eventually will, in a couple of weeks, will cover everything in the tank, every piece of real estate in the tank with bacteria. And if you have live rock to start with, that's the right bacteria you're putting in there, not the stuff in the bottle. I don't know what the hell that is, but I wouldn't use stuff in a bottle. I know they advertise it, and I'm sorry for the people who make that stuff, but live rock's much better. It comes from the ocean.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell they put in that there. The bacteria would die of boredom in a bottle. That's ridiculous.
Well, one problem with the bacteria in a bottle is how it's stored. So if it's stored in like a hot warehouse over the summer,
and you don't know where it's
the
stored.
bacteria might be all dead. I mean, it may be live when it went in the bottle, but if it's stored in
that's the same
extreme
problem
condition.
I have with frozen fish food from a LFS.
How long has it been
It
sitting
could
in
have
the
been
freezer?
sitting there for 20 years because it's not made for human consumption. There's no expiration. You could leave it there forever.
So for people who don't live near the coast, so obviously if you've got a seafood market nearby, that would be best. Most grocery stores have a seafood section. That would work for
Yes.
the clams and the oysters and the mussels.
Yes, or worms.
Right, are the worms.
I don't feed them worms. I feed them LRS food. Larry owns LRS. I like his food.
LRS foods.
And he puts probiotics in there, but the probiotics sounds very nice. I take them myself. But don't forget, that's only good bacteria, which is good for you. But to become immune, you also need the bad bacteria, which you would get from the worms.
Right. So about the worms. So I did see online there's like tutorials on how to culture and keep the white worms alive. How do you do it? How do you do it with the white worms?
Stay here. Hold that door.
Okay. He's
I'm
gonna
gonna get some white worms.
He's gonna go get the white worm culture. So I mean, because that's kind of what this does keep coming back to. It keeps coming back, the white worms, and I don't know if that's the silver bullet. That's why he can quarantine and nobody else seems to be able to get away with what he's doing. But maybe it is a very important component. I know you were big into black worms.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your white worm culture.
This thing here, now everybody's complaining that to keep worms you got to buy a wine cooler for $1,000. This thing was $40.
What temperature does it keep the worms at?
About 40 degrees.
40 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay.
But if I didn't have this, you could get a styrofoam cooler, which I use sometimes. And matter of fact, if you go to the pet shop, they'll probably give it to you because they throw them away.
So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna kind of we're gonna look at it.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry if this makes anybody dizzy.
Now this particular one I could plug into a car or my house or whatever, and there's some worms crawling around here. Then
Okay.
I get these disgusting things out of here.
And there's the white worms. It's kind of gross,
They're gross.
and your wife might not
You see
appreciate
some on
this.
here, and they're eating a paper towel here.
Yep. So you feed them the paper towels with they eat. Okay, there it is. There they are right there.
Now
You
they're
can kinda
eating this piece of bread.
So you put bread in there.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Humble's going to take a bite in a minute. So I put bread in there, and then when there's a lot of them, which there's not a lot now, you just scrape them right up, and I give them to the fish.
Right.
And this is just dirt.
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 White worms. 40
You got
degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. You could keep, now, if you don't have to keep them 40 degrees, but like I said, you could take a styrofoam cooler, and you put an ice pack in there, which I do a lot of times, and every couple of days change the ice pack. Cost you nothing.
I'm going to really quick, I'm going to go look at the back of your tank, just since we got this thing.
All right, we'll put the light on over.
Okay. We can just do that. And actually here, we can do like a nice... Okay, so here's the back of Paul's tank. And you see the big tube of PVC that's he built his own protein skimmer. Pretty ingenious. So you don't have to spend, hundreds of dollars on a protein skimmer if you've got some DIY skills. And there's
That might have been $10, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's the collection cup.
That's piped into the sewer.
So it just automatically drains. You don't have to even drain it. It just, as it fills, there we go. And that's the back of his tank. We'll kind of do like the front here.
And there's the water system. That's the. That's the.
RO, the top off.
That blue bucket is a gravity feed. See the
for your top off for RODI.
Yeah, the RO goes in there, and then it goes through this little tube and automatically feeds into the tank. There's no electricity involved.
Okay. Hey, can you open the top, or we'll look at that? So here, I'm gonna just do a nice.
All right, watch your head.
Okay. Of Paul's tank here. Sorry, if I could knew how to reverse this camera, I would. It might be easier. So that's, his tank. And then up above, so this is the algae scrubber that we were talking about. Again, he built it himself. So, you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on a algae scrubber if you know how to build things.
Probably $2.
$2.
Behind that is the reverse undergravel filter. What do you call that thing?
Oh, the box.
Yeah, this is a plastic box, and there's 3 tubes coming in the bottom that goes under the gravel.
Yep. And the water gets sucked in, it goes under the filter plate, and it comes up through the filter plate. So it's, undergravel filters, that's something that, the hobby we used to do.
In the 60s, 50s
Yeah.
and 60s.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so let me go put this back and we can resume.
Okay.
I think we're... Hopefully that got a good shot of everything.
And we're back.
And we're back. Yeah, we're about to fit. So we got about 10 minutes to go here, and then we'll wrap this up. So, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Not that I can think of. We went over the food, the bacteria, the parasites.
Okay. How to set up the tank. I mean, again, no sump. I mean, that, I think a lot of people
I
drive
don't have
themselves.
anything against some. They weren't invented when I started. the
Right.
tank. I
Nothing
mean,
wrong with a sump.
No, I could put it on. This opens up. I could put a sump in here. Nothing wrong with it. I just don't need one.
Right.
Because that protein skim is not going to fit in it.
Right. But that's the thing. You can HOB everything. And I kind of feel like sometimes people that are, are in the hobby, new hobbies, they get pushed into all this expensive equipment that they don't necessarily need. And I think you can set up a simple system like this, and I think you can be successful. And then look down the road, if you want to set up another tank, you want all the bells and whistles, you want the controllers and the dosers, I mean, great.
Now, if you're afraid of parasites, like especially on a new tank, and if I had a new tank, I would get a Diatom filter.
Okay.
Diatom filters, I have one in the back. I'm too lazy to get it. That's older than you too. My Diatom filters are probably from the 60s. They take out everything out of the water as small as a micron, which is I think 1/millionth of an inch, isn't it? Which is pretty small. And that means parasites. It'll take all the parasites out of the water. So I know a lot of the people do a tank transfer method. And
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
It would be like a constant tank transfer method. The tank transfer method, you take it from this tank and you put it in that tank.
Which is a non-chemical way to quarantine, so you're not
Right.
exposing the fish to harmful chemicals if you do tank transfer method.
And the Diatom filter is better because it's a continuous. It's like a continuous tank transfer method because you can leave the filter in there forever, and it'll filter out any parasites.
Now, have you seen? I've seen on some forums where people are actually like they're plumbing in like a pool grade because they sell Diatom filters for pools.
That's where I get it from, a pool grade.
Like a pool grade Diatom filter that would be plumbed into your system to continuously, the water has
I
to
wouldn't
flow through it.
continuously use it in the tank itself because these corals eat the little like these baby.
So it strips the good with the bad out of the water.
Yeah, it'll
Right.
take because you need the particles in there for the corals. I mean, you can't see it now, but if I stir this up a little bit, and the fish do stir it up when they go on the bottom and they're making nests and stuff, they stir everything up, and the corals eat that stuff. They live on sunlight, but they eat things too. So I wouldn't use a Diatom filter in there. But if I was afraid of parasites, like on a brand new tank, I would use the Diatom filter because it's not going to take all the parasites out, but it might leave enough in there to keep some of the immunity of the fish without giving any chemicals.
Right.
I don't like chemicals at all. I don't use any of those.
Which is another thing I don't like either. So I'm a proponent of, look, it's a necessary evil is what I feel fish medications are. Using chemicals on fish in a quarantine environment, but I don't like using any chemicals in a display tank. I don't think you should be dosing
No, I don't put
algicides
anything.
and stuff like that. You should try to find a natural
No.
solution.
Matter of fact, I got a bottle of Lugel's iodine here, probably from the 60s. It's about a tenth full. I used to put a few drops of this in there. Matter of fact, I wrote it on here. I forgot. 1 drop. I don't know how many gallons. I can't read it. I used to put Lugel's iodine in there, but the chemist guy on your board there, Randy,
He's on Reef to Reef.
he's on Reef to
Yeah.
Reef. He said you're not supposed to use this, so I mean that's after I used the whole bottle of it. But.
So what? Because you talked about you did dose like calcium and.
I dose calcium.
So what do you dose? So that's
What do
another
I
thing
dose?
we haven't talked
All
about.
right, let me see what I dose.
Because you do dose. You said calcium, I think you said, and maybe magnesium.
I use this buffer.
Okay. No,
This
so-
will last me 20 years.
do this. So it's a alkalinity buffer. It looks like. Yep, alkalinity buffer. And looks like it's diatom. Like
Well, that's what I wrote on there, but
that looks like maybe calcium hydroxide from bulk resupply.
it might be.
So
The sodium carbonate, it says.
actually, this looks like calc. It's not. So I think this is calc. No, this is more another alkalinity booster, which is probably like sodium bicarbonate. Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, you could use baking soda.
Baking soda.
I
Yeah.
used baking soda for years.
Yeah. I mean,
You know
it's
why
fun-
I bought this? I bought this because I wanted the empty bottle to put my diatom powder. Basically, what the only reason I bought this.
Yeah, really, these alkalinity, if you need to raise your alkalinity, you can just use baking soda. In fact, you can bake the baking soda for about an hour, and it dries off the moisture,
Yeah,
and you're left with sodium,
I never did.
sodium carbonate, and that's actually a pH. You can raise the pH that way.
And about every 6 months, I put a half a bag of Epsom salt in there.
What's the Epsom salt for?
Magnesium.
Magnesium, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. That's magnesium
Yes.
sulfate.
Magnesium sulfate.
Yeah.
So, even on Randy's description, you can't overdose magnesium, but you don't have to be too crazy with it. You just dump it in there. See how nice?
He just dumps it right in.
See how nice?
He doesn't mix it in a cup or anything. He just dumps it right in.
You can. I mean, you're not supposed to dump it on top of the car. They kind of frown on that. But,
So what I'm hoping is, look, I know there's some people out there that you're just so frustrated with your tank, you're just ready to just throw the thing in the garbage. Maybe before you do that, maybe you give this a try. If you're sick of quarantining and dosing pumps and controllers, and you just want something that's simple and effective, you can give this a try before you pull your hair out, and then you look like
don't get
Paul.
crazy if you see a screw or something. And remember, I throw rusty nails in there all the time.
Right.
People go crazy if they got a little screw or something fell in there. Rusty nails, very good for the corals. You almost can't overdose iron. I know people think that they have iron overdoses and electricity, static electricity and all this nonsense. You can't really overdose iron. Iron is very good for the corals, to an extent. It's good for the algae too, because I dose it because I wanted to grow algae on my algae scrubber in there, and algae needs iron. Corals need iron too because they have algae in their tissues, and the iron will be eliminated eventually from that algae scrubber. So I put some iron in there. It might not be the scientific way to do it, but it works. But if you ever go scuba diving on an iron shipwreck, there's corals all over the damn thing because they like the iron.
So we got a few minutes left. Let's talk about your book. Let's go and talk about your book.
All right, the book. This looks like a picture of me scuba diving. It's not. This was, I bought an underwater camera and I put it in the tank and I took a picture of me outside the tank as a goof. And the publisher loved it, so that's what's on the cover of the book. But I have a short sleeve shirt on here. I'm not diving in that picture. Anyway, this book I wrote about 10 years ago, 2015 I think I wrote it. And I was asked to write it by a few people, being that I'd been in the hobby probably longer than anybody. And that's why I wrote the book. It actually sells very good.
Mm-hmm.
Sells all over the world.
I've read it twice now.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Well, and when
Learn
I do,
anything?
and when I do in the winter, I use it to level my Christmas tree.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I don't have that secret.
So what is in the book?
It sells all over the world.
So if you buy this book, what can you
It
expect
says
to
it's
learn?
a 60-year history of fish keeping. This tells you how the hobby started. In like I said, in 1971, the saltwater hobby, and how I got started with I told you about my father's fish store and everything, and about a quarter of the book or a third of the book is DIY stuff. Mm-hmm. This I know is very
you a lot of
popular.
money.
This I have this over here as a matter of fact.
That's the thing. I noticed in the book there's a lot of DIY stuff, like how to make your own rock, and there's other things. If you're a
this
DIYer,
this mandarin feeder.
that's how to build that is in there. The
Yeah.
baby brine shrimp go here, and the mandarins eat them.
People make these all over the place now. I see everybody has these
Yep,
things.
that's a
They,
Hobbies mandarin feeder, and it's
they
so that's
work
the kind
very
of
good.
thing you can save money. I mean, this hobby's expensive, and this stuff costs money.
Yeah.
But if you're a DIYer and you can do some of the stuff in the book, you save yourself, some dough.
Yeah, and I have actually 2 patents on this stuff here. One is on a Mojano wand. I don't know if you know what that is, but you know what a Mojano
Yeah,
wand is, right?
he invented it.
I patented the Mojano wand. That's kill the Mojanos. People want to kill Aptasias with it too, and it'll kill them, but they're a lot faster. That's why we didn't call it the Aptasia wand. We called it the Mojano wand. And I have another patent on a seahorse feeder, which is out of date now. In case people think I'm lying, this is my my Mojano wand patent. And
Cool.
that wasn't easy to get. It cost about $30,000, but it made it back.
Yeah. But look, buy the
and
book.
it's made in Boca Raton. My that Mojano wand.
So buy this book, the Avant-Garde Marine Aquarius, and the best thing, one of the best things about this book, 100% of the proceeds go to MS
Yep.
research. So I mean,
As a matter of fact, the book cost me money because every dollar that comes in on the book, I have to pay taxes on,
Right.
even though I give it to MS.
it's a great book. I've read it twice now.
We got a phone again.
Got a phone call.
Now we're gonna put it over there.
I've read it twice now, and there's a lot of good DIY stuff, and a lot of the things that Paul has talked about here. The book goes into more detail, tells you step by step how to do it. There's pictures, there's diagrams, and everything in there. So we definitely want to help promote his book here. And your daughter wrote the foreword, I believe.
My daughter's the writer in the family. That's a picture up there. She's the writer in the family. She wrote the foreword. She is a writer. That's what she does.
So, okay. Well, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed. Definitely something different than what the information you're used to getting on my channel. And if you like what you hear, subscribe, and we'll be putting out a lot more videos. And put this right here.
Yeah, he decided to come visit me from the Panhandle, where it's too hot for him there.
We've been here 2 weeks now, so
Yep.
I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed meeting you.
Good.
Finally,
Enjoyed
after how
meeting
many
you, too.
years?
Yeah, it's been a while.
All right, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.